I think at this point in the webinar, we've been looking at, editorials, which absolutely have a bias. There's no doubt we saw. And part of our job as educators is to help kids to be attuned to the language of those. We're going to, for the second part of this webinar, we're going to sort of remove any sense that any of these are going to be anything objective, because we're going to be looking at campaign ads and campaign advertisements. And I think that this is important when we look at this slide here around the NCT's 21st century literacies, and then we just highlighted a couple here that I think are really important for this half of the presentation, is that we need students at this time to be able to manage, analyze, and synthesize multiple streams of simultaneous information. We know that our students are just inundated with images and sound and graphics, all of these pieces together, and we have to give our students the tools to be able to do these, to look at them closely, because they're coming at them all the time. The simultaneous is the key part there. And the other one that I think is so important is this notion of creating, critiquing, analyzing, and evaluating multimedia texts. Not that, as a group of English teachers saying that the print text is dead. It's not. I swear it's not. I'm surrounded in a library of lots of print text. But we do recognize that we are living in a world where students are, again, bombarded with these multimedia, and it's not enough for them just to analyze them. They have to be able to evaluate, and I think they also have to be able to create them. So those are going to be some of the frames, I think, for the next part of our discussion here. Larry, anything to add there in that?
No, not yet, John. I think I'll focus on the print feature in news journalism in a little while. But,
Great.
So right now, let's go to the 3 tracks, I think.
Right.
Next.
Excellent. Yeah. So one of the things that we try to think about with students is to giving them the tools to be able to analyze these simultaneous information. And when we're looking at a campaign ad, there are a lot of things that are coming at them at the same time. There's a visual track, what we see. There's an audio track, what we hear. And then oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes there's a text track. So these 3 pieces, they have to be able to read. It's not just looking at, but they have to be able to read. So to break it down a little bit more specifically here, when we're talking about a visual track, we can be looking at images. In some cases, they could be primary. In other words, maybe an interview. Could be B-roll, where they cut away to additional information. They could be still pictures or moving pictures. This is an important one. Sometimes these images can be original. In other words, they were created for this particular ad, or they're archival. They were used for some other purpose, but now they're being repurposed into this other purpose. Questions to think about, obviously, are why are we seeing this? How do these images make us feel in terms of pathos? But also, what are we not seeing? What are some things that the candidate is choosing not to include visually? And definitely what happens when these things are sort of recontextualized, repurposed.
What I find, John, if I may jump in, what I find particularly interesting, especially in terms of the print media, but all media, is the carefully chosen facial expressions of the candidates, which say so very much. We see a nice beaming smile and a promising look for one, and kind of a sneer or the wild-eyed look on another, and those are so immensely affecting to well, not just kids, to all of us. So the visual, absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
When we talk about a text track, and not all the ads that we're going to look at here this afternoon have a text track, but oftentimes they do. And the text track, again, could be some text that is overlaid over the image. So it could be subtitles, it could be identifications, it could be text as narration, so information that's being communicated. Oftentimes when it's in print, it feels sort of authoritative to us. So on that text track, to be able to ask questions like, how is someone identified and why? Who's not identified? And what words or phrases or graphics are used? Again, some of the ads that we're going to look at have some text track, some don't. The third track, obviously so important in a campaign ad, is the audio track. These are voices. These can be interviews, could be narration, sound effects, and music. Again, these questions are not different questions than we ask of print texts. What is the effect of a word choice? Obviously, we do that with the print text as well. But when we add that simultaneous layer of music for mood or attitude, how does that support, how does that music or those sound effects sort of support or undercut these are the three tracks that are happening simultaneously in a lot of media, not just in campaign ads, that we need to give students to sort of a chance to sort of understand as they dive in. Before we practice, Nicole, any questions maybe that have come up about those three tracks before we dive into a couple advertisements?
Not yet.
That means we're doing an awesome job, or everyone is asleep on there. So hold on. Let's check. Can you go ahead and let's say use your little check mark there if you have seen a campaign ad so far this season?
Oh, we're getting some check marks. The check mark is on the bottom of the list of participants. For those of you that maybe don't know where it is.
All right. Hey, no, that feels all right. It's really just a stupid teacher trick, really, just to make sure folks are awake. So, all right. So let's dive on in. And this is a copy of a note-taking form that I give my students. And you can see that it asks them to keep track of the visual track, the text track, the sound track, and the intended effect of each of those. The reality is that, I tend to work in a pre-AP environment, and students can't look at all three of these tracks at the same time. They really need time. So normally what I do is I assign half of the class to look just at the visual track, the other half of the class, say, to look at the sound track. And then we'll add in the text track and pieces as we go through. But that's an example of the note-taking form that I like to use. And the first ad that we're going to look at, and we're all going to cross our fingers, Nicole, that sound is working, is anytime we talk about advertisements and attack ads, we got to come back to this Daisy ad. It is known as sort of a devastating ad, 1964, that LBJ ran against Barry Goldwater. And what we'll do is that as we watch this, just think about first what it is that we're seeing. What are the images that we're seeing? Why are we seeing those? And then think about what we're hearing. How are the sounds working, especially when we get into some of the narration at the very end? We'll hear actually LBJ himself talking a little bit. Nicole, should we cross our fingers and try it?
Sure, and it's actually pretty ironic because we did just get a question about, would you like to answer it now or after the video?
Depends on what it is.
The question is, and this is why it's ironic, from Heather, do you ever play the ad without the noise first so they can focus on the visuals? That way they can see the impact of the soundtrack.
That's awesome. Absolutely. What a great, absolutely. In fact, we might actually end up doing that right now. And then we would have told you if you hadn't ruined it by asking the question, we would have told you we did it on purpose.
Well, I've managed to get my external speakers going, so I think this will be a little bit better, but we will be sending out, again, all the links. So if it isn't working, you will be able to watch it at a later date. So here we go.
All right, so it sounds as if I could hear a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Not sure how many people were able to hear sort of clear sound, but at the very beginning, the little girl was counting the petals and she was kind of counting down. She was kind of messing up a little bit on the numbers as she went through. And then what we heard audio was a much more authoritative countdown of a missile, and then we saw obviously the visual text of the mushroom cloud. So obviously, are we going back, Nicole, to we can go back. Yeah, perfect, excellent. So what we saw obviously was this contrast, this image of the innocent young girl with the horrors of nuclear war. And then what you couldn't probably hear at the very end was Johnson saying, essentially, we must love each other or die. Doesn't get more brutal than that, I suppose. We know how that election did turn out, and Daisyad has sort of become famous as being one of the most damaging ads for sure. Why don't we? Should we dare risk one more?
I just switched to my second pair of external speakers, so
All right.
you can try.
Let's run one more, and if we don't, if this one, if the next one doesn't work on the It's Morning Again in America, we'll just sort of talk about what kind of pieces we can be, and you'll see some other resources that are linked, so you can look at these on your own time. Should we give Reagan a shot here? This is 1984, Ronald Reagan, very classic, famous ad.
That sounds good. That's encouraging.
All right, so we're going to hit play now.
And we're across here.
This morning again in America. Today, interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980. Nearly 2,000 families today live on our homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 men and women will be married, and with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America, and under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
All right, so obviously, we're able to see some of the images, not always be able to do so well with the sound, but certainly saw enough of what the images were included there. When I played this to my students last week, I asked, what did you see? First thing they said was, a whole lot of white people, and they were right. Along with a whole lot of obviously iconic sort of traditional American images throughout there. Why don't we, on the next page, and this is what we're not going to do, but you'll see in the PowerPoint is linked to a number of other ads that are sort of contemporary. That these were candidates that were still in the race when I did this with my students, and in each case there are ones that are you can look at for the visual, the sound, and the text track that are there. And again, the idea of maybe building them up so that first you're looking only at the visual track, then you're only looking at the audio track, and then you're only looking at the text track, and then being able to put all these three together. The important thing is that when we're talking about effect, we know what the purpose of these ads is. I mean, we know that, to get us to vote for them or to vote against the other person. But the real effect is how they're doing that. What is it that Reagan ad is sort of selling us? This sense of nostalgia, this sense of togetherness, and this sort of idealized America. The Johnson one was clearly selling us on fear and how Goldwater is dangerous for us. So it's not just, this is what allows for students to really look very closely at the rhetorical choices for them. And the last piece before we can turn it over to Larry to talk some more about some other pieces in here is I do think it's important in all of these steps, and this is what both Renee and Robin talked about at the end of their session as well, is that students have to be able to do it themselves. We have to give them the tools to be able to analyze others, but if they're not putting into practice themselves, they're not actually really understanding the power of these. So what I did was just to assign each student or a group of students a particular politician. And I just put down some talking points that came directly from their website, and then they had to create a storyboard for an advertisement that included a visual track and some text and audio as well. And in each case, they had to be able to explain what is the intended effect. Again, it's focusing on the specific choices that they were making as filmmakers that do that. So, Larry?
We just have one question, if I could interrupt. This question is from Heather. By chance, have you come across ads by different candidates that have used the same music? Just curious because it would be interesting. Same song with for different purposes.
Ooh, very.
Great question.
That's a good one.
I haven't necessarily, but you know what I was just thinking would be really fun in that idea of having them create their own to add the same music to different ads to see what sort of effect is being created that way. That would be really interesting. You'll see, Heather and everyone else, there's a page that's linked on our resources that is just a massive clearinghouse of different advertisements that you can look through, or maybe more important, send the kids to look through to find those.
John, could I ask a question that I love the audio, text, and visual. It's Renee here. Can you clarify a little bit? The visual images, obviously, if they're archival, they're photos, they're original video, we got that. Even like in, in Super Size Me, at the beginning, there are graphs and tables, which are usually thought of as text, and I know you've said that the research shows people take notes when there's text. They think that's the most important part, even though they may, in fact, be being influenced much more by the visual or the music. But when those charts and tables, and this is true in Inconvenient Truth too, move around, are kind of their own, they move around. I mean, that's it. It's like the girl who's gaining weight, or Al Gore moving around. Do you talk about those as text or visual? I'm not just getting all hung up on terminology here, but I'm just sort of curious, because when we talk about how you use text versus a visual image, text is often seen as more logic, more reason. The visual image is more, usually more an emotional appeal, but when they're kind of combined there. Am I making sense?
Yeah, total sense, absolutely. And I think you're exactly right in how they're using the strengths of both to be able to create that effect. I tend to just sort of, by sort of what to call them, I tend to call it a text graphic track is really what it is from a sort of a technical point of view. Anything that's sort of coming post-production is really what that would be. But yeah, I think you're exactly right by having the best of both techniques.
Okay. Thanks.
We got a question from Rita. Why do you think students need to create their own ads in order to effectively analyze and discuss other ads? Is it in doing a hands-on approach that they really get the analysis?
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. And I think it's true for everything. When I teach how to analyze a poem, I have them write a poem, write a short story to understand short story. I think there's just something about really knowing it from the inside out. The best, obviously, the filmmakers know these techniques through and through in order to be able to do them and to influence so well. So I think that that's probably it for me. But my colleagues might want to throw in there as well.
Yeah, Heather, I'm going to answer a little bit here, too. One of the things at the end you'll see under the resources is the candidates have these videos, and they're basically little documentary films. And Hillary did one to announce her candidacy, and that one was, I think, announced over social media. But once someone receives the nomination, they often do a significant documentary that introduces them and really kind of encapsulates everything about them to the public. And if you look at the one Barack Obama did, it's called Mother's Promise. and that's, available, and it's also in our resources. David Guggenheim was the documentarian who was in charge of that. I mean, he's a heavy hitter. And, why do they do this? So the experience of putting something together, I think, really does help students, even if it's just, kind of quick and dirty, and they do it as a group or whatever, to see that we have real artists in here. David Guggenheim's documentary, Appalachian Spring kind of music, the whole notion of a journey, well, I can go into lots of things about it. It's very literary, Robin just said. It's really beautifully done. And, again, whether you supported Barack Obama, yay or nay, that documentary really shows, it shows such craft as well as art, and it is spot on to try to move us. And I think getting inside, as John has said, it really helps people look at those and say, wow, that's really great, but wait, here I can tell what they want me to feel is, and that's, I think, hopefully a segue to Larry, and this is what they really want me to see here, that, Barack is on a journey, and, and this is America, and taking the country with him, yeah, all of those kinds of things. And, whoever the candidate is for each party, they're going to have that, and they're not going to have, it's not going to be home movies. I mean, they're going to have professionals doing that, and it's again, this is how people get their information, and I'm betting more people are familiar with that than they are with Barack Obama's acceptance speech or his inaugural address or any of those things that are primarily words. So, probably preaching to the choir here, but anyway.